There are evenings when the air feels different. Not because of weather, but because of memory. That Thursday began like any other. A gray sky, soft rain tapping against the kitchen window, and the faint hum of an old song playing from the radio. The same one Robert used to whistle while reading the paper. 7 years had passed since he left. 7 long, quiet years of meals for one. Folded towels that stayed folded. And the porch swing that swayed only when the wind felt kind. Grief, I've learned, never really leaves. It just learns to sit quietly beside you. I was folding linens when the knock came. 3 gentle raps against the door. I almost didn't answer. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened it, there stood Daniel, my grandson. Taller now, older, eyes softer than I remembered. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice carrying both warmth and exhaustion. "I was driving through town. Thought I'd stop by." I smiled. "You know you never need a reason to come home." He stepped inside. Rain clinging to his jacket. The faint scent of wet pine following him. He looked around the house like he was checking to see if it still remembered him. "Before I go on, may I ask, where are you listening from tonight? A quiet porch with rain in the distance. Or maybe a small kitchen where the kettle hums softly. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Because stories like this don't just belong to one person. Sometimes they live quietly inside you too." I set the kettle on. He took his usual seat at the table, Robert's seat. Without realizing it, that chair had held so many years. So many evenings of quiet laughter and shared silence. When I handed him his cup, our fingers brushed for a moment. Accidental, harmless, yet long enough for my breath to catch. He smiled faintly. "Still the same tea, huh? Honey and lemon." "Some things don't need changing," I said. He nodded, his gaze drifting toward the window, watching the rain slide down the glass in slow lines. Then softly, almost like he was afraid to say it out loud, "I miss him, Grandma." The words landed somewhere deep. I felt them in my chest before I found my voice. "I do too, Daniel. Every day." He looked up, and for the briefest moment, our eyes met, steady, searching. And the way he looked at me wasn't the same. It wasn't the look of a boy remembering his grandfather. It was quieter, more careful, as if he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. The kettle clicked softly behind us, but neither of us moved. And in that stillness, something in the air shifted. Something small, unseen, but impossible to forget. After the tea cooled, I moved toward the kitchen. "Stay for dinner," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was invitation or instinct. Daniel hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'd like that." I hadn't cooked for 2 in a long time. It felt strange setting 2 plates, hearing the clatter of utensils echo differently in the air. He offered to help, but I waved him off. "Just keep me company," I said. He leaned against the counter, watching me with that same quiet attentiveness Robert used to have. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, mixed with thyme and the faint scent of rain that still lingered through the open window. The storm had passed, but the air carried its memory, heavy, tender, restless. Daniel talked about his job in short sentences, the way people do when they don't want to talk about what's really on their mind. His voice was deeper now, steadier, but when he laughed, a small, unguarded sound, it was still the same boy who used to chase fireflies in my backyard. When dinner was ready, I placed the food on the table, and we sat across from each other. The light from the ceiling lamp was soft, casting long shadows on the tablecloth. We ate slowly. He complimented the food, but it wasn't his words that stayed with me. It was the way he looked at me when he said them. Warm, grateful, but something else too. Something that made my hands unsteady. As I reached for the glass of water, he noticed. "Are you okay?" I nodded, smiling. "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was remembering. The feel of laughter across the same table. Robert's hand brushing mine as he reached for the salt. The way his eyes used to soften when the candlelight hit them just right. Now those eyes, or something like them, sat across from me again. Daniel pushed his plate aside, folded his hands, and said softly, "I wish I'd known him longer. I only remember bits and pieces." I looked up. "You were young, Daniel. But he adored you." He smiled sadly. "I think about how he treated you. So gentle, like you were made of something rare." The words caught me off guard. I looked down at my plate, pretending to focus on a piece of bread that didn't need cutting. "That's just what love looks like," I said quietly. He was silent for a moment. Then softly, "I don't think I've ever seen that kind of love." His words hung there. Not heavy but intimate. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. We just sat in that stillness. The clock ticking somewhere behind us, marking a rhythm that neither of us wanted to break. When the dishes were cleared, he helped without being asked. We moved in an unspoken rhythm. He rinsed, I dried. The way Robert and I used to. Once our hands brushed. Once was enough. It was nothing. It was everything. He smiled, and I could feel the warmth rise to my face. Ridiculous, foolish, but alive. When the last plate was stacked away, he looked at me, his voice gentle. "You know, Grandma, you're still one of the strongest people I know." I wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, turning to wipe the counter that was already clean. Behind me, his voice dropped lower. "I don't think I've ever told you how much I admire you." I turned then, slowly, and our eyes met again. The same quiet, steady gaze that had unsettled me all evening. He didn't look away this time. Neither did I. The rain had stopped completely now. Outside, the crickets had begun their nightly chorus. Inside, something far softer filled the space. The quiet hum of understanding. The dangerous comfort of being seen too clearly. And in that moment, with dishes drying in the rack, and the faint glow of the lamp between us, I realized I no longer knew whether the ache in my chest was grief, or something beginning again. After dinner, I poured us both another cup of tea. The dishes were done, the kitchen quiet again. Only the soft ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator, keeping the silence from feeling too complete. "Let's sit," I said, nodding toward the living room. He followed without a word. The old lamp on the end table cast a soft golden glow, just enough to make the room feel alive again. Robert's chair stood where it always had, and Daniel took it without asking. A small, unconscious act that twisted something inside me. I settled into my floral armchair across from him, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Between us, the small table held our tea, steam curling lazily like quiet thoughts. For a long while, neither of us spoke. He looked around the room, his eyes touching each photograph on the mantel. Weddings, summers, birthdays long gone. Each frame was another heartbeat from the past. Finally, he said softly, "You've kept everything the same." I nodded. "It helps me remember." He studied a photo of Robert, smiling, arms crossed, eyes full of that easy calm I'd loved. "He had this way of making you feel safe," Daniel said. I looked down at my tea. Yes, he did. The clock on the mantel ticked on. Outside, a breeze pushed softly through the trees. The sound of it carried through the screen door. A whisper, a reminder that the world was still moving, even if this room felt suspended in time. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped loosely. "When I was little," he began, "I used to think Grandpa was some kind of hero." I smiled faintly. To me, he was. He nodded slowly, then looked up, meeting my eyes again. "Do you ever miss being touched?" The question came so quietly. I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. My breath caught, not from shock, but from the weight of what wasn't being said. "I mean," he added quickly, "just having someone there. To hold you. To remind you you're still here." I set my cup down carefully. The porcelain clicked softly against the saucer. "Yes," I said finally, my voice quieter than I expected. "I think everyone does." He nodded, but his gaze didn't waver. Stayed on me, steady, unblinking, searching. There was something unguarded in it. Something that made the air between us thicken. "You know," he said, "sometimes when I talk to you, it feels like he's here too." I swallowed. Maybe he is. Daniel's smile was small, wistful. I hope he wouldn't mind me saying this, but... He stopped himself, as if realizing how close his words were to something he couldn't take back. I didn't press him. I just waited. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, almost trembling. "You remind me of him, Grandma. But also, you don't. You're different." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. It was there in his eyes. A tenderness too complex to name. The rain had stopped outside, but the air still smelled like storms. Inside, the only sound was the faint hum of the lamp, and the steady rhythm of two people, pretending not to notice how close they had drifted. He rose to put his cup in the sink, and for a moment his hand brushed my shoulder as he passed. It was nothing. A gesture so small it should have meant nothing. But it did. When he turned back, his eyes lingered a moment too long, and then he smiled. Soft, apologetic, uncertain. "I should probably get going," he said. "It's late," I replied quietly. "The roads are slick. You can stay in the guest room." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's what family does." But even as I said it, the words felt fragile, like glass held too tight. He gave a small nod. "Hey, just for tonight." Later, when I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway, I stayed in my chair. The lamp flickered once, and the air in the room seemed to shift again, that same unseen current that had been waiting all evening. And I realized, what unsettles us the most isn't what's said, it's what lingers quietly after. That night the rain finally stopped. The air outside still smelled of wet earth and pine, but the wind had quieted. Even the old trees stood still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I turned off the lamp in the living room, and walked slowly down the hall. The house was dim, lit only by the soft glow from the porch light filtering through the lace curtains. From behind one door, I could hear the faint sound of Daniel moving, the creak of the mattress, the shuffle of a blanket being pulled up. He was in the guest room, the same one he'd slept in as a child. I paused at the doorway, hand resting on the frame, not to listen, just to be near. For a moment I saw him again as the boy who used to drag his pillow down that same hallway, asking if he could sleep on the couch because the thunder scared him. Robert would carry him back, whispering that the world always sounds louder in the dark. Now the house was quiet, and I was the one who couldn't sleep. I made my way to the kitchen instead. The floorboards groaned beneath me, old wood remembering too many footsteps. I set the kettle on, though I didn't really want tea. It was just something to do with my hands. When the water began to hum, I turned and nearly startled. Daniel stood in the doorway. He wore a plain white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. "I heard the kettle," he said softly. "Can't sleep either?" I shook my head, smiling faintly. "Guess not." He stepped closer, leaning against the counter across from me. The kitchen light above flickered once, casting his face half in shadow. "You always used to make tea when you couldn't sleep," he said. "You remember that?" "Of course," I answered. "You'd sneak out for cookies, and Robert would pretend not to notice." He chuckled quietly. "That sounds like me." The sound of his laugh filled the space, not loud but warm enough to make the house feel alive again. When the kettle whistled, I poured the water and set 2 cups on the table. He took a seat across from me. We sat there in our pajamas, the clock ticking softly behind us. "Feels strange," he said after a while. "How quiet it gets out here at night." "I used to love that quiet," I said. "Now sometimes it feels too big." He nodded slowly. "I get that." We didn't speak after that. We just sat, the steam rising between us, blurring our faces like distance does with time. At one point, his gaze drifted toward my hand resting near the teacup. He didn't reach for it, just looked, and I pretended not to notice. A gust of wind pushed against the kitchen window, and for a moment, the candle flame on the table wavered. Its light trembled across his face, and I saw something there. Not confusion, not desire exactly, just longing. He caught my eyes and smiled faintly, as if embarrassed by his own honesty. "I'm sorry if this feels weird," he said. He stopped himself. "Just what?" I asked quietly. "I just like being here," he said finally. "It feels peaceful." I wanted to tell him it was all right, that I understood, but the words stayed caught in my throat. Instead I said, "Then maybe we both needed the same thing tonight." He looked down, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe so." When he stood to go back to his room, the chair legs scraped softly against the floor. He hesitated at the doorway. "Good night, Grandma," he said. The way he said it, carried a warmth that stayed behind after he was gone. I sat there for a long time, watching the candle burn lower, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling back into sleep. When I finally stood, I touched the teacup he had used, still warm. The imprint of his hand lingered faintly on the porcelain. And in that quiet kitchen, with the wind still whispering outside, I realized it wasn't the storm that had kept me awake. It was the calm that followed. Morning came softly, the kind that doesn't rush in, it just arrives. Pale light slipped through the curtains, touching the edges of the kitchen in thin stripes of gold. The air smelled of rain and coffee and something unnamed. I woke early, though I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I never really did. The candle from last night had burned down to a small pool of wax. The house was still, except for one small sound, the creak of a floorboard down the hall. He was up. I moved quietly to the stove, set the kettle on, and began slicing bread for toast. My hands worked from memory, motion without thought. But inside everything felt different. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full, too full. When he appeared in the doorway, the morning light caught him just right. His hair still damp from a quick shower, shirt wrinkled, eyes soft but unsure. He smiled, that small, hesitant smile I'd come to recognize. "Morning," he said. "Didn't think you'd be up already." "I never sleep much," I replied. "Old habits." He nodded, stepping closer to the table. The smell of his soap mixed with the scent of coffee, clean, warm, and too close. I poured 2 cups, placing one in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it, as though he needed the warmth to steady himself. "Thanks," he said quietly. "For last night." I looked up. "Last night?" He met my eyes for a moment, then looked down. "For the tea," he said. "For listening." His voice trembled just slightly on that last word. Listening. As if that wasn't all that had happened, or almost had. We ate toast in near silence. Outside, the yard shimmered from the rain, each leaf glittering with leftover light. He glanced toward the window. "I forgot how peaceful it is here," he said. "Feels like time slows down." "Sometimes too much," I replied. He smiled faintly. "I don't mind that." There was a long pause after that. He looked at me again. Really looked. Not through me but into me. And that's when I realized, whatever line had separated us before, it was no longer clear. I reached for the butter knife, but my hand brushed his instead. A small thing. Harmless. Yet the air between us changed again. That same quiet shift I'd felt the night before. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. After breakfast he helped with the dishes. Our movements fell into rhythm again. He rinsed, I dried. Just like Robert and I used to. Once his sleeve brushed mine, and it sent a quiet tremor through me. The kind that has nothing to do with fear. When we finished, he leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely. "You make it look easy," he said. "Being here. Alone." I laughed softly. "It's not easy, Daniel. It's just quiet." He studied me, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Sometimes I think quiet is harder than noise." There was something in the way he said it. Something that made me wonder if he was still talking about silence. He stayed longer than I expected. Talked about work. About the city. About how he missed cooking real food. It was all ordinary conversation. But the pauses between words were not. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. The morning had brightened now. The porch bathed in gold. "I'll come by again soon," he said. I smiled. "You always say that." "I mean it this time." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Instead he leaned forward. Just enough that I could feel his breath, but not enough to call it a goodbye kiss. Then he stepped back, smiled faintly, and left. When the door closed, the house fell quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was alive now, haunted by the echo of everything unsaid. And as I stood there, watching the sunlight spill across the floorboards, I realized that sometimes it isn't storms that change us. It's mornings like this, when nothing happens, and yet everything does. I didn't expect to see him again so soon. It had only been 2 days. The rain had returned, soft this time, barely more than a mist whispering across the porch. I was sitting by the window with a book I wasn't reading, when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Then the familiar knock, 3 soft raps, the same as before. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I figured you might like the real stuff this time, he said with a grin. I smiled despite myself. You drove all this way just for coffee? He shrugged. Maybe I just missed the quiet. But the way he said it, the way his eyes held mine, told me there was more to it than that. He stepped inside, the same easy way he always had. The air seemed to recognize him. Even the old clock on the mantel ticked louder, as if it too remembered. He handed me the cup. His fingers brushed mine again, just for a second, but long enough to stir that same quiet tremor from before. Hazelnut, he said. Your favorite. I smiled. You remember. I remember everything, he replied. The words landed softly but lingered. They made me forget what I was about to say next. We sat in the living room. Same places as before. Same 2 cups between us on the table. Outside, the rain began to fall a little harder. A rhythm the house already knew by heart. He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to it. You know, he said. It's strange. This house. It feels like time doesn't move here. That's what makes it peaceful, I replied. He nodded slowly. Peaceful. Yeah. But maybe also dangerous. I looked at him. What do you mean? He turned toward me, and for a moment, I thought he might not answer. Then softly, sometimes peace makes you forget the rest of the world exists. I didn't respond. The truth of it was too close. The rain pressed against the windows harder now, blurring the outside world completely. Inside, only the soft light of the lamp remained. Warm, close, and a little too kind. He reached for the photo on the coffee table. Robert and me at the lake years ago. He studied it carefully. You look happy here, he said. I replied. He made life feel simple. Daniel looked up from the picture. Do you think love ever gets simple again? No, I said quietly. It just gets quieter. He smiled, but there was something heavy in it, like he was holding back words he shouldn't say. The thunder rolled somewhere far off. He set the photo down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something personal? I hesitated. You can ask me anything. He looked down at his hands. Do you ever feel lonely? I mean really lonely. The question caught me off guard, though I should have seen it coming. I took a slow breath. Yes, I said softly. Sometimes I think I've just learned to hide it better. He nodded. I know that feeling. We sat in silence after that. But it wasn't empty. It was full, thick with everything we weren't saying. Then, almost without thinking, I reached across the table. My hand rested over his, lightly, carefully, the same way I'd done when he was small. He didn't move. He didn't pull away. He just turned his hand, so that our fingers rested together, palm to palm. The warmth of his skin startled me. So familiar. So new. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain. When I finally looked up, his eyes were waiting for mine. And in that moment, the quiet, trembling space between us, I forgot the years, the names, the right and the wrong of it all. He whispered, barely audible, I don't want to lose this. I swallowed hard. Then we shouldn't name it, I said. The thunder echoed again, closer this time. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening like the rain on the glass. And that was all. No words after. No movement. Just 2 people, sitting too close, in a house that suddenly felt far too alive. By evening the rain had turned heavy. Thick drops drummed on the porch roof, a steady rhythm that made the whole house hum. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills, and the power flickered twice before going out completely. For a moment I just stood there in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator gone. The world suddenly hushed except for rain and wind. Then I heard a knock. Soft, familiar. I didn't need to ask who it was. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, hair damp, shirt clinging to his shoulders. He held a small flashlight in one hand, and in the other a bag of candles. Figured you might need these, he said. Rainwater traced down his jaw, and he brushed it away with the back of his hand. You shouldn't have come out in this weather, I said. He smiled faintly. I didn't like the thought of you sitting here in the dark. There was no arguing with that. I stepped aside. Come in before you catch cold. He set the candles on the counter, lit them one by one. Golden light flickered across the kitchen. Soft, uneven, alive. Shadows danced on the walls. The rain sounded louder now, like a heartbeat pressing against the glass. I poured us both some tea. The kettle had gone quiet hours ago, so I warmed the water on the gas flame instead. We sat across from each other at the small table, 2 candles between us. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just listened. To the wind. To the creak of the porch swing. To the house breathing around us. Finally he said softly, "It's strange, isn't it? How some nights feel different before they even begin." I looked up. He wasn't smiling, just watching me with that steady, searching gaze. "Yes," I said. "And once they begin, they never quite leave you." A low rumble of thunder filled the pause. The candlelight trembled. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "Can I ask something?" "Of course," I said. He hesitated. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, "Do you ever wish time could stop? Just for one night?" The question caught me somewhere deep in the chest. I looked at him, at the soft light playing across his face, at the way his eyes held both youth and weariness. "I used to," I said finally. "Now I just wish it would slow down enough for me to remember how it felt to be seen." He didn't look away. "Then maybe that's what tonight is for." The air shifted then, not with movement but with meaning. That invisible thread again, tightening between us, pulling us closer without permission. A gust of wind rattled the windows. The flame bent sideways, then steadied again. The shadows stretched longer across the floor. He reached out almost absently and placed his hand near mine. Not touching, not yet. I could feel the heat of him in the small distance between us. The scent of rain, soap, and faint coffee clung to the air. "Daniel," I said softly. My name on his lips would have undone me, so I spoke first. "This, whatever this is, it can't." He stopped me with a look, not sharp, not pleading, just full of quiet understanding. "I know," he said, "but that doesn't mean it isn't real." The words hung there, half forbidden, half undeniable. We sat that way for a long time, watching the candle burn lower. He finally leaned back, his voice low. "Maybe some things aren't meant to last," he said, "only to be felt." And there was the truth neither of us had dared to name. Something had already happened, and yet nothing had. When he finally stood to leave, the rain had eased to a whisper. He took one last look around the kitchen, the candles, the empty cups, the silence. Then his eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world stopped exactly as he'd wished. "Good night, Meg," he said softly. I didn't answer right away. I just watched him go, watched the door close behind him, and listened to the rain begin again. The house felt both smaller and larger all at once, like it knew what we'd both just tried not to say. Morning arrived slow, as if unsure it was welcome. The storm had left the air washed clean, cool, damp, with that scent of earth that follows heavy rain. The light filtered through the curtains, soft gold against pale walls, and every shadow felt newly drawn. I woke before the clock chimed 7. For a moment I wasn't sure if I'd dreamt the night before. The flicker of candles, his voice low in the dark, the sound of rain against glass. It all felt like something that had happened to someone else. But when I walked into the kitchen, the truth was waiting. 2 teacups still sat on the table, his jacket folded neatly over the chair. And beside it, a single candle burned halfway down, its wax pooled like memory. He had stayed. I didn't know whether to feel comforted or afraid. Somewhere down the hall, the floor creaked softly, footsteps slow, careful. When he appeared in the doorway, his hair was still damp, his shirt untucked. He looked younger somehow, and older too. "Good morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "I didn't mean to fall asleep here." I smiled faintly. "It's all right. The storm kept everyone awake, I think." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was going to leave after it passed, but I guess it didn't." Outside, the world was shining with the aftermath. Drops clinging to the porch rail, leaves trembling in the early light. Inside, silence settled again, but it wasn't the same silence. It carried weight, the kind that knows what's been left unsaid. I poured 2 cups of coffee, out of habit more than plan. He sat at the table, hands wrapped around the cup the way he always did. For a while we just listened, to the drip of water from the eaves, the faint song of a bird testing the morning. Then he said, "You always make things feel easy." I looked up. Easy. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Being here. Talking. Breathing. He paused, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. I don't remember the last time I felt like that. There was something in his tone. A softness I hadn't heard before. It made me want to look away. But I couldn't. Maybe that's what home is, I said quietly. Not a place. Just someone who remembers who you were. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said it. So softly I almost missed it. That's what you are for me. The words landed somewhere deep. In that quiet part of the heart that doesn't argue, only listens. I didn't speak. Didn't know how to. The clock ticked once, loud, steady, as though the house itself was holding its breath. He stood, moved to the sink, and set his cup down gently. Then turned back toward me. Meg, he said. I know this sounds wrong, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel isn't real. The room felt smaller suddenly. The air warmer. Outside the world kept shining. Oblivious, innocent. I think we both needed something we didn't expect, he continued. Maybe it's comfort. Maybe it's love. I don't know what to call it. But I know it's real. I wanted to speak, to stop him, to say this isn't right. He can't. But the words stayed caught somewhere between thought and breath. He took a step closer. Not enough to touch. Just close enough for me to feel his presence. I'm sorry, he said. Maybe I should go. I shook my head slowly. No, I whispered. Don't be sorry. Our eyes met. And for that brief, unsteady moment, the years between us vanished, erased by the quiet understanding that neither of us could explain. The wind moved through the open window, lifting the lace curtain just enough to brush my hand. I felt the cool air and the heat of his nearness, all at once. And somewhere inside that mix of fear and longing, I knew, whatever this was, whatever name it might take, it had already begun. The day wore on quietly. The rain had stopped, but its memory lingered everywhere. The porch still damp. The grass flattened where the storm had leaned too hard. Inside the house felt slower, as if it too were trying to understand what had changed. Daniel moved around softly, helping without asking, folding a blanket, straightening the photo frame, his touch gentle, familiar. It was as though he was afraid to leave a mark, and yet every small thing he did left one. I stood by the window, watching the light crawl slowly across the yard. There was something unbearable about its beauty, something that made me ache. He came to stand beside me. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said almost too quietly, "It's strange how some mornings feel like the end of something." I turned to him. "Maybe it's just the beginning of knowing what it meant," I said. He smiled, faint, tired, full of something deeper than words. "You always know what to say." "No," I whispered. "Just what not to." We had lunch together. Simple as always. Soup, bread, silence. But everything tasted different. Every glance felt heavier. Every touch accidental yet remembered. When he reached for the salt, our fingers brushed again. We both paused. He didn't move his hand away right away this time. The world outside was bright now. Sunlight spilling across the table. And yet I felt something dimming inside me. The knowledge that whatever this was, it couldn't stay in the light too long. After lunch he walked toward the porch. The suitcase I hadn't noticed before sat by the door. He had packed quietly while I wasn't looking. "You're leaving," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "I have to get back. There's work. Life." He tried to sound casual, but his voice betrayed him. A small quiver in the quiet. I stepped closer. "Will you come back?" He met my eyes. "I don't know, but I'll think of you. Every time it rains." There was nothing to say after that. We stood there, two people who had shared something, too delicate to name and too real to deny. He reached for the door, then stopped, turned back, and for one heartbeat too long, his hand found mine again. That warmth. It said everything we hadn't dared to speak. And then he was gone. The door closed softly. The sound echoed through the empty rooms. I stayed where I was, watching the light shift across the floorboards. Outside the world carried on. Birds returning, wind chimes stirring, life moving the way it always had. But inside, something had shifted for good. Not broken, just changed. I walked to the table, his coffee cup still half full. I didn't move it, didn't wash it away. Some part of me wanted it to stay. Proof that the morning had been real. I sat down in his chair, hands folded in my lap. The cushion was still warm. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt alive. Felt like memory choosing to stay. That night, as I closed the curtains, I caught my reflection in the glass. Older, yes, but not the same woman who'd opened the door days ago. Something softer lived in my eyes now. Not regret, not shame, just a quiet understanding. That love doesn't always arrive when it should, but when it must. Maybe it wasn't meant to last. Maybe it wasn't meant to be spoken. But it was real. And that was enough. If you've listened this far, thank you for being here. Stories like this one, they don't belong to just one person. They live quietly inside all of us. In the moments we never talk about. In the feelings we never name. If this story touched something in you, leave me a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. Or simply write, I understand. And if you believe that love, in any form at any age, still matters, then please, subscribe. Because there are more stories waiting to be told.